Well, we welcome the Reverend Vernon K. Walker back to MSO. Reverend Walker, great to see you again. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic, all things considered, and great seeing you as you and Bill as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it is. All things considered, and that's the whole idea. I want to start, Reverend Walker, with your election to the Democratic State Committee. Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, yes. On April 4th, there was a reorganization meeting, and it was time for folks to get elected, for a batch of candidates to get elected as add-on candidates for the Democratic State Committee. And I ran on the affirmative action seat, and I was part of the progressive action slate. And fortunately, I was able to secure one of the affirmative action seats. So I'm serving on a 4-year term with the Democratic State Committee. I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do and how we can lift up the voices of the marginalized, the disenfranchised, the least of these, and those who are often who feel forgotten in the political process. So I'm really excited about that. And so the meeting was originally supposed to be in person on April 4th, but obviously because of the COVID-19 situation, and it's not safe to gather and have large gatherings. So the whole meeting was done virtually, and I thought the Mass Dem staff did a tremendous job in organizing the meeting and organizing the election, via Zoom, and I thought it was just really fantastically done.
What's your role exactly? Is your role as the policy director of the Young Democrats of Massachusetts?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So essentially what we do is we hold discussions. Discussions around policies that committee members who are part of the Public Policy Committee want to have or discuss or delve into. So over the last almost year, we've had multiple conversations around women's reproductive rights. We've had conversations around ranked choice voting. We've had conversations around housing for all. Currently, we are planning a town hall with Senator Ed Markey and to discuss and engage around some policies that he has been advocating for, that he's been a staunch supporter of for most of his career, all of his career, and some of his ideas of what he hopes to do moving forward. We'll talk about the Green New Deal, and essentially, and a list of other policies that he has championed. And then another committee will have a conversation with Congressman Joe Kennedy to a town hall, a similar town hall, similar to the one that the Public Policy Committee will be doing with Senator Markey. But before that, so we have, before the town hall, historically what we've done is we've had these meetings and these public events where we invite people such as we had Representative State Rep Mike Connolly talk about his Housing for All bills, and then we come together. We have meetings monthly. We come together. We have these discussions, and if these discussions lead us to inviting people, elected officials in the State House, who are pushing a certain bill, then we go forward and invite them. We go forward and invite them, and we have a robust conversation. Then after that conversation, then the Public Policy Committee will vote. And then after we vote, depending on if we pass it or not, after we vote, then we make a recommendation, and then we send it to the board, to the statewide board of the YDMA, and then there's another vote held around if we will publicly endorse this or not.
Let me ask you about you mentioned the Markey Kennedy race, the Senate race coming up with the primary in September. Mm-hmm. With the coronavirus, the COVID-19, a very unusual politicking going on right now, or no politicking, if you will. What are you hearing? What are you hearing about that race, and how does that play out?
Well, I'm hearing a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of energy around Senator Markey and his reelection campaign. There are a lot of supporters that I'm hearing from who are interested in seeing him be reelected to continue to advocate and push for the Green New Deal and other policy. He's been a long-time champion on climate change issues. Then there are others who are excited about the Kennedy race, about Kennedy jumping in rather, and excited about Joe Kennedy's candidacy. To me, it's unclear why Kennedy would run at such a time as this, when I think we need to have our resources marshaled on defeating Donald Trump and ensuring that Joe Biden becomes the president of the United States. So for me, it's very baffling to understand why Kennedy would run at such a time as this, therefore taking resources from national donors and drawing of resources and attention of national donors for his own candidacy. But some posit that he's just running on a good name and he's running simply out of hubris. So we'll see how this shapes up. We'll see how this goes. But to answer your question, Bill, I am hearing many different thoughts from both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting, and could spark some interesting conversations, I'm sure, within the Democrats. What about the national picture, Reverend Walker? Because it seems obvious that it sort of has to be put aside at the moment. But on the other hand, this is an election year. It's gigantic. The election isn't that far away. No one knows what's going to happen between now and then. But what is the status as you look at it from the young Democrats of Massachusetts point of view?
This is a very interesting time. It's the unprecedented times. Obviously, society hasn't seen a pandemic on this global scale since the 1919 Spanish flu. And obviously, I looked at the number yesterday. There's over 248,000 people that unfortunately have died because of the coronavirus, and over 60,000 Americans have died because of the coronavirus. So I certainly think that politics would take a back seat to ensuring the survivability of human beings. And it's really a situation where, a lot of things are being done virtual. A lot of calls, a lot of voter engagement, a lot of reaching out has been being done virtually because of the pandemic that we find ourselves in. And I think overall people are hopeful in Biden candidacy. I mean, some people aren't really energized by his verbiage or energized by his presentation or energized by what he brings, but people are hopeful that he can beat Donald Trump and that he will bring a revolution into the White House, that he will bring quote unquote normalcy back into the White House, that he will bring decency back in the White House, that he perhaps may bring love back in the White House. But certainly, I think people are very interested in a change and in a change in our national political leadership because there has been a complete and absolute failure by the Trump administration to adequately and sustainably prepare people and prepare this nation for the pandemic that was coming. So I think that alone would disqualify Trump from being reelected. Although there are still people who are energized by his, by his rhetoric and energized by his energy. But at the end of the day, I think that because we're living in unprecedented times, people are just trying to do what we can with what we have to ensure that we try to help flatten the curve and get over the worst nationally, get over the worst of the pandemic.
Even at this late time, even though on paper Joe Biden does not have all the delegates that he needs for the nomination, and that I know
Mhm.
New York State canceled their primary, so that didn't help him at all.
Mhm.
Is within Democratic circles, is there any discussion that it might not be Joe Biden, that there might be somebody else?
I have not heard that, but I want to pick up on what you mentioned, Bill. We've saw Alaska, Connecticut, Delaware, my home state, Pennsylvania, territory of Puerto Rico, and 12 other states cancel their primary, or not necessarily cancel, they push back their presidential primary or switch to voting by mail with an extended deadline. And some states have postponed their primaries multiple times as this pandemic goes on. And we certainly see that the pandemic is impacting this the presidential race, because there no longer can be rallies held, and there's no longer candidates running on the campaign trail going from state to state. So I think the Democratic Party is unified around the idea, and I get the vibe, and I am under the understanding that folks are unified and in agreement that Biden will be the presumptive nominee, and that he will be the nominee. It'd be interesting to see who he picks as his VP, because that can help garner some support for him in swing states.
I just kind of have one more question, really, and you mentioned it earlier in terms of dealing with the climate and so on. And from what I've gleaned, are you still involved in the communities responding to extreme weather?
Yes, I serve as the program manager of the what we call the CREW program.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, CREW, what we do, we help prepare communities in an equitable, sustainable, and inclusive manner to be connected to climate resilience. We help prepare these communities and people to be prepared, because we know that there are going to be more extreme hot days as time goes along. There's going to be more severe storms, at least here in the New England area. There is going to continue to be sea level rise. So we know that these things are coming. There are going to be severe winters. There's going to be more precipitation. And because of these things will be coming, these effects will be coming. The scope, purpose, and aim of CREW is to prepare people in an equitable, sustainable, and inclusive manner across the state, and as we continue to grow across New England. And CREW is under the Better Future Project organization. It's a program under the Better Future Project. And the Better Future Project has been around since 2011. And there are two other programs, the 350 Mass and also Divest Ed. But CREW is the only organization in the state that I'm aware of, from a grassroots perspective, that is interested in preparing communities across the state equally and climate resilient components, and be in equally and climate resilience manner.
I have one question. I'd love to hear you talk about what's happening at your parish, because not just the services, but also all the work that a parish would do, which must be impacted by the coronavirus and the isolation and so on, the shutdown, if you will, from COVID-19.
Yeah. So just to start more generally, churches across the nation are having to not invite a whole bunch of parishioners, or if any at all. And a lot of churches across the nation are either using Zoom, or they're live streaming, or they're Facebook Live. So certainly COVID-19 has had a tremendous impact on religious life and the religious landscape across the country. Particularly at my church, Pentecostal Tabernacle has been live streaming before the arrival of COVID-19, and we continue to do that. The church is continuously having different small groups. The church has had that before COVID-19. And if we're the fundamental lesson I think that a lot of people who attend various kinds of churches across the nation are learning is that community is more important than ever before. Sometimes people come to church, oftentimes people come to church for the community life aspect of the congregation. Yes, some come for the preaching, and some come for the singing, and some come for both the preaching and the singing, which is important. Although what's equally important, I think, is the community aspect. And certainly we see it in the scriptures, in the Christian scriptures, in the Bible. We see that it's an emphasis, particularly in the New Testament, how believers should have fellowship one with another, should be in conversation with one another. And I think Jesus laid it out pretty clearly with the second greatest commandment being love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, you can't love folks if you don't see folks. You can't love folks if you're not in their presence. So you can't love folks if you don't talk to them. So we are learning through our technological advances to stay connected with people. And some churches across the nation, they're doing good work. They're giving out food. Some churches are setting up testing sites for doctors to come and to be accessible in the community, particularly in marginalized and low-income communities. I've seen churches have testing and have the medical professionals come to do testing for local residents in that community.
Reverend Walker, I don't have any more questions. I appreciate your taking the time with us, but is there anything else you'd like to mention to us?
For anyone who may listen to this or may see this interview, please get out and vote. Please don't neglect to vote in the November elections, whether it's by mail or whether it's safe, it will be deemed safe to go to the booths. Please vote. Your voice is your vote. Your vote matters. And if you know 2 or 3 people who aren't very interested in voting, encourage them to vote, and encourage them to mobilize to the polls. There's a saying in the civil rights movement, I believe the civil rights movement, where they had the slogan "Souls to the polls," and that's certainly what we need in 2020. Souls to the polls, not just for the federal elections, because federal elections are very important, but state elections are important, municipal elections are important, because local representation matters, and state representation matters, because obviously we see across the nation state governors taking initiatives to serve the best interests of their constituency and making decisions to serve the best interests of their constituency where there has been abject failure by the federal administration.
All right, that is the Reverend Vernon K. Walker.